right, we are going to take a different look through Esther now. We've gone through it slowly, and what we want to do now is kind of see the big picture. Now that we've had an opportunity to kind of see all the details, and again, we're going to look at this. I'm going to show you two different essential ways, depending upon the time, and then a big idea at the end if everything works well. So when we look at the overview of Esther, one of the things I want us to appreciate now that you've seen kind of the process is when you look at this as an overall book, you have what is known as an overcoming the monster plot. That there is this huge evil that is out there that presents itself and must be overcome. And so that's what you have in Esther. We already have seen this in smaller bits and pieces of times in which you have that idea of the monster here. But that's really what the book as a whole is. So it is essentially the idea of the Jews facing what is a genocide. That's the monster, due to the malice of Haman that he originally had toward Mordecai, but then expressed and expanded to the whole of the Jewish nation. So in order to address this, we found that Mordecai's guidance, Esther's bravery, and Xerxes' anger are what turned the tables on Haman's plan. So all those things come together at the end and end up changing everything. Well, I want us now to look through the book now, the whole of it, as its whole story, okay? And to appreciate what has been done within all these smaller chapters and episodes. If you recall, the idea of an exposition is that it's giving you all the fundamentals that you need to know before the problem kind of hits typically. Or it can be, the problem can be part of it, but before the real action to address it is undertaken. So it depends on how you look at a story. It can be the problem comes on the scene, but we don't address it yet. We're waiting, and that's still kind of giving you extra information. But that's what you have, and that's the first two chapters. The first two chapters of this book are all, we generally say it's set up for what's to come, that all these things have to kind of be in place. That's why it begins, for example, with chapter 1 and the account of Vashti and the banqueting. You don't start the book of Esther with Esther. We wait. Esther doesn't appear until chapter 2. Why? Because we have to have the right situation to appreciate what it meant for her to be selected. Now, there's some other things we'll get to later on about that are significant, but that's key to understand how this all works out. So you end up having Vashti make her decision, and then the rejection. That's key as terms of telling us this had to happen. Okay, this for the rest of it to go forward. So you have to have a situation of where a queen is needed by one queen being deposed, essentially. So then you get into chapter 2. And in chapter 2, at the beginning, this is now, what are we going to do to replace her? Now, historically, you've had all sorts of stuff that's recorded in history happen in between this. Remember, in chapter 1, that's essentially that original banquet was essentially a planning session for the war with Greece. That was the follow-up to his father's war with Greece. They lost both, close both times, but they essentially did not win. And so he's coming home, and now back, what are we going to do? We've got this problem now with the queen that he's reminded of. Oh, wait a minute, I'm missing out here, so we're going to get another queen. So that gives us all the background with Mordecai, his relationship to Esther, the nature of the background. We aren't told why it needs to be kept quiet and everything, but there's all this process that leads to her being installed as the queen. And then you get this little story about Mordecai overhearing about a plot, a conspiracy against the king, and he gives Esther that information. She turns it over to the king, and that's taken care of. Okay. Now, notice what now we have as far as core, before anything's been brought up about what's ultimately the big problem. You know the reason why Esther is installed. You have an idea of the relationship between Esther and Mordecai established, and you have the fundamentals of Mordecai and his proximity to the palace, his communication with Esther, and his character in relationship to the king, which will reappear later in the story. So all of these things are kind of fundamentals that are laid out in the first 2 chapters. Now you get to chapter 3, and it goes all the way through chapter 8. And this is normal in stories, is the rising action is, you kind of establish the world first, and then you have all the tension until you get to it's taken care of. So that's what you have here essentially. So now let's walk through and remember, and I'm doing this to help us when we get to the outline. The first thing that happens is now while we have rising action, tension building is, okay, there's this tension that this new appointee, he's been raised up, Haman has toward Mordecai. Again, you're getting an idea of his character, that he is important, he is powerful, and he is vain. Okay? He wants all attention. Matter of fact, he can't get enough. He's the second most powerful man in the empire, but he can't have somebody ignoring that power in any way. So that's his character. You have the character set up there in verses 1 through 6. In response to this, then, to show you how malicious he is now the fact that someone doesn't bow down to him, now he's going to take out his whole race. So that's your introduction of that. Now we've got a big problem in chapter 3, 7 through 15, that the Jews are going to be the subject to a genocide. All right. So that it's one of those things we say, that escalated quickly. All right. We went from someone being upset because someone wouldn't bow to let's kill everybody. Well, so the reaction then you get into chapter 4, you get 2 ideas here as well that are important. And notice these are all reactions. You move from Haman in his attitude in verses 1 through 6 of chapter 3, and then that's being passed along to the king, to Xerxes as a player in verses 7 through 15. You then move on to chapter 4, and you get Mordecai's reaction to this. And that's what's found in verses 1 through 9 of chapter 4. He's mourning, he's in sackcloth and ashes. He's doing everything he can to display publicly how he feels about this same thing. So you've walked it through with Haman, Xerxes, and Mordecai, which leaves Esther as the main character, the last one to learn about this and have a discussion about it. And that's what you get at the end of chapter 4, is now it's Mordecai working to get her attention, which is carried on through a go-between, so that she understands what's actually happening, and that she also has to make a decision. So all of this works through the characters of where this tension is, and it's building the tension till you get it to this height to Esther, because essentially she's presented as the only person who can do anything about it, that has it in her favor to operate against this. And that brings you then to chapter 5. So she's decided, okay, and we'll come back to chapter 4 because that is very important for other reasons. So she decides she's going to do something. They fast, they pray, and now she's going to approach the king. So she approaches the king, the beginning of chapter 5. He holds out the scepter to her, which is significant. You're approved. And says, I want to have a banquet. This is the plan she created over that 3 days of fasting. Hold banquet, just you and Haman. Okay? Then I'll tell you what I want. So I want to, this is the buttering up process, right? We talked about that. She approaches the king. She has to make sure that she's in with him, that he's good with her, and gets him seeing her again and spending time that she is taking care of him. Now, Haman, in the meantime, goes to this banquet, so it's now, okay, we're going to come and do this again the next day. He goes home. Another level of tension that has to come up now is that now it's like, okay, we're going to get rid of Mordecai now. The Jews can wait, but we're going to take care of Mordecai immediately. That's what comes up at the end of chapter 5 with the advice of friends, neighbors, and wife. Right? So that's what you get. So all this is happening. In the meantime, we get to chapter 6 now. The king, this is our king, where the chapter where everything's going to change. King has trouble going to sleep, get his, go back and read over all the great things, all the things, the reason why I'm great, things that have happened. And you're reading through that. They come to the portion about Mordecai informing about on the conspirators, and the king's like, hold on here. So he appreciates this now. What's been done for that man? Well, nothing. And again, at this moment, and here's where we now bring these things together. Haman shows up, ready to, with his plan to have Mordecai immediately killed. And so, who's coming up? Well, it's Haman. We'll bring him up here. How should I honor the one that the king wants to honor somebody? What should he do? Because of his vanity, he assumes he's talking about him. Lays out this lavish plan to dress that person in all kinds of royal garb with a royal steed and have him walk through the main area of the palace area in the town for everyone. And this is what you do to someone that the king really appreciates. This is what happens. So he puts this out there, and so he immediately regrets this, I'm sure, when the king says, you do that for Mordecai. So everything then, boom, hits. Okay, so I want you to just appreciate now, we've had the 4 characters, we've had now 3 of them together with the banquet, and now we've got a different 3 that are essentially interacting within this account. And now it's the direct conflict, going back to chapter 3, between Haman and Mordecai, and the person that he hates because he wouldn't bow down to him, now he essentially has to lead through the streets to get everybody else to bow down to. That's essentially what's presented here. So at that point, bless you. So now we come back, this has been done, and Haman goes home again, tail between his legs. Things have changed, right? He's like, oh, wow, everything's going right. He's angry. This time he's like, oh. And now you get a completely opposite advice. Oh, you can't do anything about this situation. So while he's kind of feeling sorry for himself about this, word comes, as the king sends word, go get Haman, bring him to the banquet. We got another banquet today. So here he comes. Back to the banquet, we're serving. King says, again, what do you want? Esther, tell me. And remember the whole phrasing, up to half my kingdom. Is just, and so she says, and lays out in a very, if you remember, a very deliberate fashion. She basically says, I just want you to do something about my people who are scheduled for destruction. And lays out the problem first. That's the monster. And then he's like, well, who would do that? And this is what I love. Guy you're banqueting with? A guy across from you? Him. And she sets it up to point out she's going to be a victim of all this too. She's built up the good feeling again between them. Queen, she's in his good graces. He likes her, accepts her, and all of a sudden he finds out from her that someone wants to kill him, and it's this guy. Wants to kill her. So, okay, he's steamed. So he heads out just trying, you can just see him seething. In the meantime, Haman is begging for his life from Esther. Notice how everything's flipped. Begging for his life, the king comes back in, looks like he's assaulting her. And that just made matters worse, obviously. So we're going to take care of this. Kill him. So he's taken out, he's killed. We're not sure exactly the timing on that. And hung on the gallows that he had built for Mordecai. Again, flipping the script. But that didn't cover everything. But that's what you have. He has him executed. So that's the rise in action. The climax, though, if you recall, is found in what do you do about the big problem. Haman he created the big problem, but he himself wasn't the big problem. The big problem was that decree about a genocide. So you get to chapter 8, and you have to do something about this. And now that Haman's out of the way, Mordecai is brought in, this time as a confidant, explain the relationship with Esther, and now they're just kind of figuring out what to do with this problem. And the king, just like he had done in chapter 3 with Haman, here you go, whatever you want, as a decree, here's my signet. Okay. Which apparently they kind of they had something that was around their neck, and they wore like this, and you'd roll it. Here, take it off. Here you go. So they did that and say, we got to get a different decree. So they come up with a decree that lets the Jews fight back. So that is what addresses the big problem, and therefore, okay, this has been addressed. And the way it's treated in Esther, partially I think because it's obvious that they won, because this is written later generations down the road, so that this was the big moment and therefore the climax. But you still have to have, well, what happened then? Because you're explaining something else. And that is, well, they had to fight, okay? So they defend themselves, chapter 9, 1 through 19. And then, after they've been successful, most of the people in one days of fighting, that they then have a celebration the next day. In Shushan, it was 2 days. And this becomes the foundation for the Feast of Purim. And it's brought up specifically, and we talked at length about why it would be named after the original problem. That means lot, as it's explained in the text. But this is what has to happen. Okay, we've got the situation resolved as far as we've got our answer to how to solve this problem, but this follows from it. The fighting and then the holiday, because that's partly what we're explaining. That leads to the denouement, the kind of how are we supposed to feel about this, tying off all the loose ends part. And that's what chapter 10 is, just 3 verses. And that is, we're going to talk about Xerxes, honor and success for what he did, that Mordecai is promoted and serves with distinction. That's verses 2 and 3. And here's the big thing you are to take away from this. All is well because of God's providence. That's not stated. We're going to come back to that. It's not stated, but that is the way you're supposed to feel at the end of this reading. Okay. Now, everyone needs an outline. So I want you to take a look, based on what we just went through, I now want to put that together, but we looked at it from a story point of view. I now want to look at it from a little bit more analytical point of view. Whoa. That's not right. I have no idea. It looks like that for me too, and it didn't on my computer. So, what now? Actually, that's a different slide. No. This is a. Someone poured water into the machine, and so what you have here, and I don't have it all in my notes or memory. What I've got was a series of things. This was have to do with food. This, believe it or not, that says food. Trust me. And what I simply want to bring up in terms of the themes that you get going through Esther is when it comes to food, the primacy of food in some way going through it. Because you go back to the banquet that started, you have a banquet at the beginning that they're eating while they're planning. Then they have the big banquet at which you've got all this going on, the wine, and that where Vashti refuses, right? Then you come in, and then once Esther is put in as queen, guess what you do? You have a feast. What are Xerxes and Haman doing when when they make the decision? They're banqueting, right? But then you get to chapter 4, and it's different. It's the opposite of that. Mordecai goes off on his own, and then at the end, you see that after they've already been fasting, then Esther says, you fast for 3 days. The opposite of what was done, and that was their decision. And that contrast is important to tell you the difference in the thought process and the thinking. Then you come to chapter 5, and where is Esther now? She's serving a banquet. You get to chapter 7. Once again, you've got a banquet. You come up, and after you've had the decree which follows that, you get up at 9, they fight, and what happens after the fight? You have a feast. Okay? So that is a deliberate way of showing you all these different things and the relationship to food and the point of view of the feeling of people as they're doing it. The thought that they're putting into things, and also how positive they are about their situation. Okay, now we'll get to this. Decrees. What you see also throughout is the importance of decrees. You get introduced to this again in this is important in your exposition. The whole thing that happened with Vashti does not just introduce you to there's an opening in the queen slot. It's also, how do they make these kind of decisions? That's established in chapter 1 in how he's making the decision about what to do with the Vashti problem. And that is, he talks to advisors, all right? So he talks to his officials. He tends to rubber stamp whatever they say. And then they have this delivery of decrees throughout the empire that are based upon the king's signet ring being used to show it's from him. And this happens in chapter 1. It happens in chapter 3 with that decree from Haman's decree. And it happens in chapter 8 with Mordecai and Esther's decree. And each time it highlights both the use of the decree, and it goes into detail about all the places it needed to go and how it would be spread throughout the empire. In Persia, they had a tremendous road system. And they communicated, you're talking about going essentially all the way from, if you think about where Israel is, all the way to India. Okay, and your communications are a rider on horseback. That's overland. They did have some navy, but they were mainly a land power. They had set up on these roads way stations. What we would look at, they had essentially a Pony Express system to keep moving the message along. So when it brings that up, that here's what it was. They were following all the official ways to get that information out there that they used. It was going through all the official channels. Okay. You also have the theme of conspiracy that is pointed out in chapter 2. Again, that's in the exposition. You have this small little message about a conspiracy. Well, that's foreshadowing the big conspiracy that's about to happen. So all these connections are writing up about what do you do in these situations. where it comes up for us in the writing, it makes perfect sense because we've been introduced to those ideas, even though those ideas are foreign to us. We haven't studied about Persia that much, but the way it's told makes those things clear. Also, think about how many times you have, 3 different times, the importance of the king's gate comes up. This has to do with, originally, that's where Mordecai is when he finds out about the conspiracy. It's where he places himself after the decree to be noticed, and then it's where he returns after being honored by the king. So you get this idea that king's gate, which is entrance into the palace essentially, that proximity is important in the account regarding Mordecai. You also have the promotion to second in command that occurs chapter 3 and verse 1 with Haman, and then chapter 10, 1 through 3 with Mordecai. So that's, again, set up for that. Now, in a little bit lesser way, you get, number one, the gallows. The way the gallows are used, we don't think about it, but those original conspirators in chapter 2, guess what was done with them? They're put on the gallows. Guess what's suggested that by Haman's wife and family that they do with Mordecai? Put him on the gallows. Guess what they end up doing with Haman? Put him on the gallows. Guess what they do with Haman's sons? Put him on the gallows. Okay, so that is the not super common, but it's a very well known literary aspect of in Hebrew. And it works like this. You have things all come to a head and then you back out of them, but it's kind of like as a cross and there's something right there at the middle. But there's a relationship between, as it's going on, between every area. So that at the middle, that's where everything kind of changes, but the thing that was just before it, the thing after it, have some relationship. The thing right before that and the thing after that, similar relationship. So that the very beginning has something in common with the very end. Now, so what I did is, the reason why I kind of had this feel of the arrow look to it, is how you write that out. What I want you to see is, and I'm going to do this a different way, but I wanted you to see it in this way. What you have is, there's splendors of Xerxes' rule, okay? So if you just keep going down, this is in complete order of the book, but the middle, Haman, Mordecai, and a role reversal. That's in the very middle of the book, where everything flips and changes. You got splendors at the beginning, splendors at the end. You have a feast after the splendors, a feast right beforehand. You have Esther winning the favor of the king in chapter 2. You have the Jews winning the favor of the king in Esther 9. You have the king using a signet ring for a decree in chapter 3. You come down in chapter 8, the king's signet ring is applied to a decree. You come up and you end up Mordecai confronting Esther in chapter 4 and Esther confronting Haman in chapter 7. You have on each side of this, you have the 2 banquets that Esther hosted. So what do you have? It comes in and it comes to the middle part, which is where everything changes. So essentially, everything's going badly for the first 5 chapters. Chapter 6, everything changes. Chapters 7 through 10, everything is going well. And that's how I have it. This is my own outline, so don't steal it and publish it because it's worth nothing. But that's what I see. Now let's take another look at how you would see this. This maybe makes it easier for you to tell the connections. I've just done it, but to understand it, I've done it where you come down on the left, the role reversal is at the bottom, and then you go up just so that they're side by side. People see things differently, and sometimes I wanted to make sure you had 2 different options to be able to see what's going on in the book. I guess I could have told you this at the very beginning, but number one, what's the fun in that? But also, I don't think you could have possibly appreciated it. You've been through the book now, so that now you're familiar with all of this, and you can kind of see now the structure of what was done and accomplished. All right? Yes? It's a U. Yeah. It's the exact same outline. It's just presented a different way visually. That's all. All right. So what was the point? Okay. And y'all are like, finally. We mentioned this when I introduced the book. God is not mentioned in this text. And that's one of the reasons why it was difficult originally. It took a while for it to be accepted as canonical, as being inspired. Because the name of God isn't even in it. But he's implied throughout the whole thing. In Ephesians 4 verse 14 is the clearest place. And this is that place where Mordecai is addressing through written correspondence Esther. And he says, he has such confidence, we'll read it, that something's going to be done. For if you remain completely silent at this time, relief and deliverance will arise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. Yet who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? And the important thing I want you to see here is the confidence Mordecai has that there will be deliverance. I do not think that is any kind of hubris on his part. I mean, when you look at the situation, who would be arrogant in that situation? He's confident that there'll be some deliverance provided. On what does he base this? Okay. Now, this comes back, and we're working on an idea about understanding that actually in Scripture, in the old beginning, from the very beginning, that what you find is the seed being essential from Genesis 3:15 forward. Now, I don't have time to go through the whole thing here, but essentially in Genesis 3 verse 15, when you have it emphasized that there's going to be this seed to provide deliverance in victory over Satan, that's a promise from God. That's elaborated on in the promise to Abraham, in which there are 3 promises that are related to it. There's going to be a great nation, you're going to have land, and in thy seed all nations of the earth are going to be blessed. Now, if you know God, okay, and this is going to come back to the whole thing, in that God is capable of keeping his promises and always keeps his promises, then until those are fulfilled, you know that seed is going to continue. He fulfilled the nation promise beginning in Exodus. He fulfilled the land promise in Joshua, and up to, you could think of the whole with Solomon's day. After they went into captivity then, the thing that has not been fulfilled is that core seed promise. That's what they were looking for, and they did have an understanding. This again goes back to Genesis, though there's a lot more I need to probably work out on this. But if you go through and develop that throughout the book of Genesis, Genesis then ends with, until Shiloh comes. And that's basically the Messiah. So until the Messiah comes, we're going to be around. Okay? And how is this all going to be worked out? Again, book of Genesis. You got the seed. Seed is the big theme through Genesis, right? It's one of the big core ideas. That death, that God wasn't kidding. There's death. Deception, as now we're reflecting because of we've listened to and been tempted by Satan, Genesis 3. Now we do the same thing to one another, deception as a theme. But then you get to the end of Genesis and you get this. God, this is a response when the Joseph's brothers are afraid after Jacob dies, he might do something to them. As when, what is he? Second in command in Egypt. And he could do something. And he says this, God meant it for evil, or you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. How does God go to accomplish all this? He can use even evil things to bring about his will, working behind the scenes. Contrary to what you wanted to accomplish from it, he can accomplish something greater from it without having to interfere miraculously. Guess what you get in Esther? The very fact that he pulls out and does not name God in the writing of it draws attention to the events. And by doing so, it forces us to understand what's happening, being accomplished indirectly by God rather than directly. It automatically forces us into that frame of thought, which is what providence is. So now I want you to think about this. All of these things had to happen, or happened. All these things happened before Haman was upset by Mordecai, which created the problem. Well, let's go over. Vashti had to refuse to go to the banquet. That's her choice. The officials had to recommend deposing her. That's their idea. Xerxes had to agree to deposing Vashti. He had a weak will, but he still had will. The official had to recommend a particular method for selecting a new queen. Xerxes had to go along with that. Esther had to be beautiful. And she had to be selected by Xerxes. And then Mordecai had to overhear the conspirators and report it. Because all of those things are essential to what happens later. Everything. And I'm just trying to tell you, we don't even have the problem yet. Afterwards, what do you end up having? Well, the lot had to fall far enough out to allow the Jews time to prepare, which it did, to the end of the year. Mordecai had to make the decision to appeal to Esther. Esther, on her own, had to accept that responsibility. Xerxes had to choose to hold out his scepter to Esther. Xerxes had to accept the invitation to the banquet and then accept the second invitation. Xerxes had to have trouble sleeping. He had to be reading that particular account or have it read to him, that particular account. Haman had to enter at the right time to answer Xerxes' query to have his own plan thwarted. Xerxes had to agree both to execute Haman and sign off on another decree. Xerxes had to promote Mordecai to prominence, and the Jews had to prepare to fight. Now, all of that happened afterwards. All of those had to happen to get the outcome you get. So, what does this tell us? All of these decisions, all of these situations, and all of these events occurred completely naturally. Two, every individual exercised free will in making decisions. Otherwise, we have a real problem theologically. Three, by the way, that would just mean that God would be manipulating and putting everyone at risk. Many of the essential elements necessary to achieve the outcome happened before the problem entered the picture. Human beings, you can have some people that are pretty good about manipulating situations afterwards, talking to people and all that. I know of no one that's good at manipulating the situations before the problem came up. Do you? Okay, God, and this has really worked out well for Eddie's lesson earlier, because God is eternal, he can answer a plea and a plan made here back in time to provide for it. Because it's not time to him. He's not subject to it. So you can have something happen. All these things have to have in place. Do something about this. But guess what? God's already doing something about it. He's already planning for this. And that idea of perhaps you rose the kingdom for such a time as this. Mordecai's thinking this. Okay, I get it. There's the reason why you were selected. This is why. So it's God's omniscience. He knows, he has access to know anything he wants to know. And eternality, and that is his ability to act within any period of time to accomplish something at any other period of time. That makes it possible for him to influence events by creating opportunities for people whom he knows will respond in the way required for his will to be achieved. He knows people, and he can do these things and put it in its timing, ultimately. It's the only way you end up seeing it. And we only know for sure this because it's recorded. That's how we know. That's why Paul says in Philemon, perhaps, for us. In this we say, absolutely. Why? Because providence is the point. Okay. Next week, I'm going to be in a gospel meeting, which came up quickly. After that, what I want to do, so in 2 weeks, is actually one last thing with Esther before we move on to something else. Yeah, I know. Y'all are thinking, really? Okay. I want us to look at what you can learn, though, from the character arc of Esther, which is a different thing than what we've been looking at with plot all along. This is character. We're going to do that in 2 weeks. In the meantime, I've got to figure out what we're doing next. But apparently it's not Ephesians, because Eddie's already called Ephesians. All right. Thank you, everyone.